John 6 verses 11 to 15 is a passage from the New Testament, specifically from the Gospel of John. Here's the verse. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. This passage describes the miracle of Jesus feeding a large crowd with only 5 barley loaves of bread and 2 fish. After giving thanks, Jesus distributes the food to the people, and miraculously, everyone eats their fill. Not only is everyone satisfied, but there are also leftover fragments, which Jesus instructs his disciples to gather so that nothing goes to waste. The people witnessing this miracle recognize Jesus as the long-awaited prophet and are so amazed that they want to make him their king, but Jesus withdraws to be alone. Expounding on this passage, we can derive several key lessons and themes. Divine provision. The miracle of feeding the crowd demonstrates Jesus' divine power and provision. He is able to multiply the small amount of food to satisfy the hunger of thousands of people. This reveals Jesus as the one who can provide for our physical needs in abundance. Gratitude and giving thanks. Before distributing the loaves and fishes, Jesus gives thanks to God. This emphasizes the importance of gratitude and acknowledging God's blessings in our lives. It serves as a reminder for us to be thankful for what we have, even if it seems insufficient, and to approach God with gratitude in all circumstances. Stewardship and not wasting. After everyone has eaten, Jesus instructs his disciples to gather the leftover fragments so that nothing is wasted. This teaches us about the importance of stewardship and not squandering resources. It reminds us to be mindful of God's abundant provision and to use what he has given us wisely and responsibly. Messianic recognition. The people witnessing the miracle recognized Jesus as the prophet who was promised to come into the world. This echoes the prophecies in the Old Testament, such as the one in Deuteronomy 18 verse 15, where Moses foretold the coming of a great prophet like himself. The crowd's recognition highlights Jesus' fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies and his identity as the long-awaited Messiah. Parallel doctrines from the Old Testament. The manna in the wilderness, Exodus 16. The feeding of the crowd in John 6 parallels the provision of manna in the wilderness during the time of Moses. In Exodus 16, God provided manna from heaven to sustain the Israelites during their journey in the desert. Both instances demonstrate God's supernatural provision and care for his people, emphasizing their dependence on him for sustenance. Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, 1 Kings 17. In this Old Testament account, the prophet Elijah encounters a widow who is preparing her last meal for herself and her son before they expect to die due to the famine. Elijah tells her to make him a small cake from the little flour and oil she has, promising that her supplies will not run out until the famine ends. Similarly, in John 6, Jesus multiplies the meager resources of the loaves and fish to feed the multitude. Both stories highlight the theme of God's miraculous provision, even in times of scarcity, and emphasize the faith and obedience required to trust in God's promises. Overall, John 6 verses 11 to 15 reveals Jesus' divine power, highlights the importance of gratitude and stewardship, and points to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies. The parallel doctrines from the Old Testament, such as the manna in the wilderness and Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, further emphasized God's provision and faithfulness throughout history.